Hey everyone, and welcome back to my ranking of the top 24 video games I've ever played. Last time we covered games that got onto the list because I didn't have any other notable choices, games that were there because of nostalgia, flawed experiences that I enjoyed, and we got our first glimpse of a great game on the list, that being Sonic Generations. Before we kick off, let's outline a couple more things that I forgot to mention in the first video. The games will be judged based on their complete package. For example, if there's DLC that I've played or experienced in some way, that will be included in judging the game overall. Second of all, just because the game is lower on the list doesn't mean I think it's a bad game. Just because Sonic Generations is in the bottom quarter of the list doesn't mean I think it's bad. It's a very good game and I do really like it. It's just not as good or enjoyable as the rest of the games on the list, so keep that in mind before you start criticizing me. With all this said, let's carry on with the list, kicking off with number 18. Kicking off from Sonic Generations, we have my favourite Sonic game that I've played, Sonic Forces, which is sure to send half the Sonic fanbase into an extreme rage. Look, Generations was great, but I just like Forces better, okay? Calm down. This was a game that introduced me into the Sonic franchise, and will always hold a place in my heart for that. The story, while flawed, did work. Infinite was awesome, even with his I am not weak, and his backstory actually made some sense to me, even though they did portray it very poorly. The story even made relative sense. Apart from classic Sonic, and Null Space, and Infinite's clones, and the fact that the story could have been way better. Look, the game could have been way more, it could have been fantastic, but it was still a good game, and a very fun experience. The gameplay was smooth and polished, and felt marvellous to play in the modern stages. The Avatar stages were very fun, with the different gadgets allowing for new paths and different ways to explore the levels, and classic Sonic stages were not awful? Look, I don't mind classic Sonic, but he just wasn't necessary here. The gimmick in Generations was the classic levels, and even they weren't too amazing. These ones were just worse. The ability to create your own character was nice, and I reckon that part was well done, even though it did mean that the game's graphics got a downgrade as a result of it, because, you know, you can't pre-render a custom character. The customization was bigger than I expected, with the different species getting different powers, all the Wispons being different with powers and benefits, and you could either make a serious looking OC like I did, that being Spike the Hedgehog, or you could make some horrific monstrosity like Barney.
Doesn't look like much.
No shit. He looks so confused. Guys, where am I? What? Thank you so much. Wait, are we fighting people? What is this?
Episode Shadow brought 3 new great levels, with some alright story developments, and let you play as Shadow in the main game, and the fact that it was free means that if you get it and don't like it, you don't really lose anything. One flaw was the lack of content. The stages themselves were very short, the extra and secret stages didn't really provide much, and after beating the game, unless you're a completionist who like to hunt down red rings and silver moon crescent whatevers, there wasn't really much left to do, unlike in Generations where you had tons of fun challenges and rewards to unlock that actually felt relevant. However, one more positive point for Sonic Forces, as is to be expected with all Sonic games, the soundtrack was goddamn amazing. There wasn't a single song on the entire playlist that I disliked, and a lot of the tracks were truly great, with Infinite's theme being my favourite song even after a year. The game may not have been perfect, and Sonic Generations is an objectively superior game, but I still love Sonic Forces, and it holds the title of my favourite Sonic game, and it probably will do for years to come. The sequel to Xenoverse is here, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. Not a mixed bag as in half good and half bad, more like there's a whole lot of good but some pretty significant bad that just drags down the experience. First off, let's address all the good points, because, you know, positivity. In terms of gameplay, it was better in literally every single way than Xenoverse 1. The combat felt way better, like it was an actual combat system and not just a mindless button masher. Every species had a transformation this time. Most of the moves were better and fun to use. I said mostly. Each character had a unique fighting style, the roster was far more expansive seeing as the game came later, super armor was removed, only being there through fair power-ups, and everything just felt way more polished. This is what Xenoverse 1 should have been. The world was also way better, seeing as there was more things to discover, more NPCs to interact with, and you could actually fly in the hub world. The side quests in the world felt more special as well, and apart from the Namek missions they got repetitive after about 2 loops, the rest of them all felt pretty fun. Even feeding the Boo children. The writing was also arguably better in terms of dialogue and quips, and it made the interactions between characters fun to listen to. One of the biggest step-ups in the game was the customization. There are now more options than ever, with tons of unique outfits that look great on your characters, and the generic ones are all color customizable as well to add that extra level of customization. To prove it, here's a fashion montage. However, we can't go through the positives without now listing the downsides. The story was not good. It felt fairly uninspired at times, as all the charm had been lost with the original. All the historical missions followed the exact same design. There's a villain, they're stronger, you go in there to even the odds. Or, in scenario 2, there's a villain, this movie villain is also here, you go there and fight the movie villain. The original story missions were slightly better, like the ones at the end of the game with Toa and Mira, but they still felt lackluster to me and not as good as Demigra. The story in DLC Pack 6 was good though, and it almost made up for it. I'll admit, watching some classic Dragon Ball Z moments in Xenoverse 2's gorgeous CGI was great, but the missions themselves were just too linear to stay interesting for very long. Also, the parallel quests were also hit or miss. They all mainly boil down to fighting a bunch of guys with progressively larger health bars until it takes you a full 5 minutes to take down one guy. It's not bad on your first time through, but on reruns to grind for materials, it's just irritating and time consuming. At least they fixed the RNG though, that was a great fix. Xenoverse 2 was definitely a better game than Xenoverse 1, but as for a better experience on the whole, it's honestly kinda hard to decide between it and its predecessor. However, Xenoverse 2's more polished game design, the fun versus matches, and the great DLC, somewhat making up for a lackluster main game story, lands it here on the list, but sadly, it can't go any higher. Getting back to the games that are largely here because of nostalgia, we have Burnout 3 Takedown. Just a warning, the music in the background is not from the game itself, because if it was, I'd get the video claimed. When it comes to a deep story, character development, or a game that will really make you think about things, look elsewhere. This game is none of that. If you want a game that is pure fun and enjoyment, look no further. This game is all that. Burnout 3 is the second best racing game I've ever played, and it is absolutely great fun. The high speed was exhilarating, and striving to complete the challenges in as short a time as possible was amazing. But enough about that. If you want speed and skill, play Gran Turismo. The main reason Burnout 3 Takedown is so great is because of all the destruction. You know when you're playing a racing game and you're really angry at your opponents? Well here, just ram into them and send them flying off a cliff to their doom. Yes, you can destroy your opponent's cars, you even get rewards for it, and it's super satisfying to see your opponent go flying as their car crumples into a metal pancake. However, it also goes both ways. If you crash, you'll become the metal pancake. So it's a nice risk and reward system that was a pleasure to play around with. There's even a mode where the goal is solely to cause as much destruction and carnage as possible from a single crash, and those modes were always some of my favorites. The range of cars was pretty cool, the customization was nice, and the music was absolutely kick-ass. Listening to Crash FM during the races was great, and it added to the experience, even though my young mind sort of didn't get many of the jokes. I can't really find the words to describe how I feel about Burnout 3 Takedown. I just really love this fun game, and if you can play it, I seriously recommend it, as there's not many racing games out there that can come close to the fun levels of Burnout 3. Sadly, nostalgia alone can't really make the game go any higher, and a fun factor only can carry it so far. Therefore, it lands here on the list. The first of the 4 Arkham games to make the list, and it's the black sheep of the franchise, Arkham Origins. I've heard this game be criticized a lot, far more than all the other 3 games put together, yet I don't really think all of that is warranted. Yes, the movement is clunky. Yes, it feels a little unpolished in terms of bugs. Yes, the multiplayer was absolutely pointless. Yes, it was largely like Arkham City. However, for every criticism you can throw at it, there's also a high point. The combat has new additions like the shock gloves, and the new upgrades you get in the skill tree add more to your fights than ever before. The enemy variety also added way more to the fights, and it was a pleasure to take down a large group of enemies because you never knew what enemy was going to step out onto the battlefield. The world was at its biggest so far, yet it still had its fair share of things to see and do, even though admittedly it did feel a little bit lifeless, but I did really like the snowy backdrop. The Predator segments were also at their best at this point in the series, with new upgrades that actually helped you in the stealth segment, such as the new remote claw, which is a pretty sick weapon. The story was actually pretty good apart from a couple of continuity issues. The voice acting for Batman and Joker, while different, was still great, and the writing was good on the whole. Oh yeah, and we can't talk about a game with bosses and not mention said bosses. And oh my god, these bosses. Arkham Origins has, on average, the best bosses in the whole Arkham series, with Killer Croc, Mr. Freeze, though he wasn't as good as the Arkham City version, Firefly, all the Bane segments, that Joker segment at the end, and goddamn Deathstroke all being fantastic bosses. If I could, I'd include them all on my top 50 bosses of all time, but with the rules I've set for that list, I can't. You'll see what I'm talking about when the video gets released. Origins may have lacked the atmosphere of Asylum, the balance of City, or the awesome gameplay of Night, but it tried some new things, and while they may not all have stuck, they were still fun. It may be the weakest of the 4 Arkham games, I'll admit that, but it's still a very good game, and very worthy of its spot on the list. The first Assassin's Creed game on the list, and it's the one from 2015, Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Set in Victorian London, the game follows both Jacob and Evie Frye in their quest to take back London from the evil Templar Starrick. While I do prefer the movement system from Rogue, Black Flag and Assassin's Creed 3, the parkour system was still nice, and was made infinitely better by the rope launcher, which made it awesome to get around London. The biggest flaw with Unity, in my opinion, was how slow the parkour was, and with the rope launcher, it's really fun, albeit not as much fun as the previous generation of Assassin's Creed games. The combat was great, with it being more balanced than 3, 4 and Rogue, and far better than Unity's, like oh my god. The counter and combo system all made sense, and was a pleasure to play through. The 3 different melee weapons all provided nice different ways to play, and the unarmed combat made fight clubs amazingly enjoyable, to the point where I'd just repeat them over and over because I was having so much fun. The upgrade system was streamlined and easy to understand, and the customization was less than Unity, but it still had a nice array of options that you could play around with. The 2 protagonists of the game were some of the better ones from the Assassin's Creed roster, and again, I don't really think I've ever seen a bad protagonist out of all the Assassin's Creed games I've played. Evie was a nice, serious assassin, struggling with what her mind told her to do and what her heart told her to do, and Evie and Henry's relationship was not as cringe-inducing as I expected. I still didn't care too much for it, but at least it didn't make me uncomfortable to witness, and it was almost touching seeing the conclusion to that little arc. Jacob was my preferred character though. He's the typical eager-to-kill Templars character who really does so without thinking of what will come next. However, we see him learn from those mistakes at the end, where he realizes that all the chaos he's causing is doing more damage than what he's fixing by killing the Templar. I also really love Jacob's personality, with his constant jokes making me laugh more often than not. Seeing the final mission where Jacob actually takes the time to prepare and plan his next move, whereas Evie rushes off straight away and is all reckless, it was almost funny to see, and it was a satisfying conclusion to their character arcs, and it was awesome taking down Starrick with them together. They played off each other very well, and it was a pleasure to see their story. Until Jack the Ripper, where it was decided that Evie was the only character who mattered, and Jacob was okay to be basically killed off for the entire DLC. In all honesty, that DLC disappointed me from a story perspective big time, seeing as it nearly got rid of Jacob completely, although the Jack missions were actually interesting to play through to an extent. The villains in the main game are a bit of a forgettable bunch though. I remember Starrick because he was the main bad guy, and Roth because he kissed Jacob that one time, and that's pretty much it. The modern story was forgettable too, seeing as they never really had a modern story that kept me invested after Rogue, and the concept itself of a modern story lost all major relevance after Assassin's Creed 3. The world was big and full of stuff, with the boroughs being fun to take over, as opposed to something like Spider-Man, where the bases got boring after about 2 of them. The historical characters were a lot of fun to interact with, seeing as I knew who all of them were. I mean, I've always wanted to go interact with Queen Victoria. I mean, I haven't, but the game doesn't know that. Syndicate may be the worst Assassin's Creed game on the list, but it's still an incredibly enjoyable experience, and the only reason it's this low is because all the games above it are better. The game itself doesn't really have a significant flaw, and because of that, along with all the other things I've listed, I will always hold it close to my heart. The second Arkham game on the list, and indeed in this part of the ranking, and it's the finale to the legendary Rocksteady trilogy, Batman Arkham Knight. Sadly, it's only the third best Arkham game. Let's list the positives to start with. For the Arkham gameplay formula, it was pretty much perfect. The combat was as good as it's ever been, even though the fact that you can go flying across the map may question Batman's non-superhuman qualities. There were tons of enemy types, tons of takedowns, and they were all amazing to utilize and witness. The stealth was also excellent, with practically no noticeable flaws, except maybe it was a bit imbalanced to play the Predator challenges as Harley Quinn or Catwoman, but I'll get into that later. The DLC was kinda hit or miss. The Arkham stories were just tiny story snippets showing what happened before or after Knight, and most of them were just okay at best, with Red Hood's one being the only one I truly enjoyed. Tim's mission was kind of average, Nightwing's was okay, and Harley's story was better than average, mainly because of the psychological aspects that happened whenever you were playing through the mission. As for the side characters themselves, they all basically played the same as Batman, yet their varied gadgets and fighting styles made them feel unique. That's right, you can play as multiple characters in this game, and it was done pretty well. Nightwing was one of the more fun characters, seeing as he was extremely acrobatic. Tim was alright, but I found him kind of average. Azrael was just basically Batman with a different skin. Catwoman was about as fun as she was in Arkham City, but she just feels imbalanced with all the new takedown requirements on enemies, some of which she can't actually do. She just doesn't feel strong enough. Same thing goes for Harley Quinn, though I do like her rage mode with the instant kills, which kinda makes up for her lack of variety otherwise. Batgirl felt fluid and just as well polished as Batman and all the other main characters, and Red Hood was just as excellent. I nearly prefer playing as him to playing as Batman, with his guns and simpler gadget lineup being just pure fun to play around with, while also being extremely deadly. Apart from Catwoman and Harley Quinn as previously mentioned, stealth with all these different characters was also very good, with all their styles being different and Red Hood, Batgirl and Batman, with Azrael by extension, being the best characters in my opinion in the stealth aspect and in the combat aspect as well. For another positive, the graphics are phenomenal. To this day, it's the best looking game I've ever seen. Leading out of graphics is the various skins. Nearly every single character you can play as his alternate skins, and for the most part, they all look great, with Batman Beyond, Flashpoint, 240% suit, and the Arkham Origins suit being my favourites from the Batman lineup. Now, let's talk about the Batmobile. Yes, the Batmobile. Quite a subject of controversy. Not controversy like PewDiePie saying a bad word, but controversy because people really have mixed thoughts about this thing. It was well done, let's just say that. There is literally nothing wrong with the Batmobile in terms of design or mechanics. It's polished, it works well, it's fun to play as, it's fast, and it's easy to control, and it's just great overall. The problem is what we call oversaturation. When you take something good and ram it down our throats so much that it takes up more time than it needs to, unless it's really good, people are gonna get sick of it. That could be taken so wrong in so many ways. The fact that the Batmobile was used for so many things in the game dragged it down, and the fact that several bosses and puzzles required the Batmobile felt forced. However, some parts, like the Arkham Knight's excavator battle, felt like a good way to use the Batmobile, and some of the scenarios where Batman used it for puzzles were actually cool, and it felt like something Batman would actually do. The story was good, but some aspects of it were kinda hit or miss. I did enjoy the story overall, with the whole plot about Scarecrow and the mysterious Arkham Knight pushing Batman to his limits as he attempts to stop them from flooding Gotham with fear gas, while also stopping every other criminal that have all teamed up for the one big night. There were a multitude of badass moments, some that were genuinely sad, and the true ending was relatively decent, even though I personally found it a little disappointing. However, I didn't enjoy the story as much as I did with any of the other Arkham games. Maybe it was the Batmobile, maybe it was the lackluster bosses, but it just didn't feel as Batman-y as the others. The side missions were enjoyable, but they were overall pretty repetitive, so it ultimately got a bit tedious over time, such as taking down the outposts, though maybe not as tedious as other games on the list. Highlights involved Man-Bat, whose tale was genuinely haunting and there was an ominous ending to the quest, Penguin giving you an opportunity to team up with Nightwing, and the inclusion of Catwoman in the Riddler quest was nice, and Batman even got a kiss at the end, even though he promptly went and killed himself soon afterwards. All the missions in the Season of Infamy DLC were also great, with Ra's al Ghul offering a real choice that made you put thought into it, Killer Croc's tale being interesting and tragic, Mad Hatter's mission having a cool trip down memory lane, even though it was the weakest of the missions, and Mr. Freeze's mission having a genuinely sad ending, with a quest that I really got into. The worst part of the game, though, is the bosses. The only bosses that I enjoyed at all in the game, really, were the Cloudburst tank, the Excavator drill, and the Killer Croc fight, two of which are Batmobile missions, and the last one is DLC. One of the biggest problems was how they took characters that had phenomenal bosses in the past, and they ruined them. Firefly, who had an amazing boss in Origins, had a lame fight where you just follow him with the Batmobile for about 3 minutes, and Deathstroke's boss fight was so bad that it still holds its spot as the worst boss in all the Arkham series in my opinion. To sum up this small essay on Arkham Knight, From a pure gameplay perspective, it's amazing. As a whole package, it's still great, but it's sadly dragged down enough to keep it in the bottom half of the list. However, it was still an extremely worthy conclusion to the Arkham series, and it's a worthy conclusion to this part of the list. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed the second part of my top 24 games of all time. We've covered all the games in the bottom half, and we've already seen a lot of truly excellent pieces, Assassin's Creed Syndicate and Batman Arkham Knight being the prime examples. However, the games from here on are just truly incredible, and I cannot wait to cover them with you next time. Like and subscribe for more content on my channel, hit the notifications if you want to get the next part, and I will see all you guys in the next video very soon.
All you remember has gone away, but you're still standing here. So much has happened, it's hard to bear. Shadows of sadness within your stare.